Like, he is a nice guy.
Um, Red light's on. Is the,
Green light.
There we go. All right, it's on. I'm Ryan Streeter. I'm the director of the Civic House Institute, and it's really an honor to have you all come today to this event. The Institute's a couple years old here at UT. We do a lot of work on economic policy, law and policy issues, Increasingly, we're going to do kind of future of education and higher education is one of our verticals. But one through line for a lot of our work is just social mobility in America and around the world. And I'm really pleased to be able to invite Joel Cocken up here in a minute. I'm going to change mics. Let's see if this one's a little better. Joel Cocken at Chapman University is a fellow of the Civitas Institute and maybe known to a number of you here as a demographer, as a futurist when it comes to urbanism issues in America. And Joel's assembled a great team that's just put out a report on the future of Latinos in America, which we think is a really important topic when we look at social mobility in the future of this country. So we wanted to bring everyone together for this event to kind of talk about the report and things that are related to it this morning from our series of esteemed panelists and speakers. So to introduce everybody and to introduce the day and the report, I'm going to turn it over to Joel Cocken now. Joel.
Thanks, Ryan. This is going to be very brief. I want to get Jennifer up here as soon as possible. It's weird to be introduce your co-author of something, but you know, I'll get over the weirdness. Being from California, but one of the things that I think really important about Jennifer, first of all, she leads the Holland and Knight West Coast Land Use Environmental Group, which means she's constantly in court. And what I think one of the great things about what Jennifer does is she begins to make people who have policy ideas to start to think about the consequences. We have seen tremendous spread of poverty, of people not being able to buy a house, of good jobs disappearing. And the biggest losers in that are basically historically undisturbed minorities, particularly Latinos and African Americans. And the gap has gotten greater and greater. And what's probably most annoying of all is it's all been done in the name of racial and social justice, but it's had the exact opposite effect. So with that set up, Jennifer.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, I might lean on something. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. I always start by thanking Civitas and telling everyone how much I enjoy visiting and getting a sense again of energizing, optimism, future orientation. It's like we're not just sitting around waiting for sea level to drown us. And that's kind of a little bit of a thing in California. And so it's a little too much doomerism. And what it's doing to our young people and working families is not healthy. The second thing I want to just assure everyone is I'm here on a very temporary visa. I'm not one of these Californians who's going to come and buy your house up from under you. I'm returning to Berkeley, for better or for worse, at the end of the day, but it really is a privilege to be here. I've long admired Joel Cocken, who writes truth to power. And in California, believe it or not, that is writing what my parents would view as kind of common sense to the far left, which is our dominant political party. It's a one-party state, but in a one-party state, the swing, the pressure is from the edge of the party, and the centrists or moderate or labor side Dems, which I was until 8 months ago for my entire life. We are the far right, and it's a very uncomfortable situation. And Joel has never hesitated to say, what are you doing? And what are you doing to which people and for what? So he's on Furious shortlist, to be exterminated when the revolution comes. One more quick introductory piece is California used to be a manufacturing powerhouse. It still has manufacturing GDP, but that's more in high-value older facilities. We're in the middle of the biggest resurgence of manufacturing in America since World War II, really. And California is poised to miss all of that. And my family and I am from Pittsburgh, California, which named itself to get U.S. Steel to move there. Both grandfathers, Mexican and German, worked at U.S. Steel for their careers. My dad went back after high school and worked there until he was permanently laid off at age 57. My sister just started college, little sister, and I just graduated from law school. I come from I think, not uncommon background. People think, California, Looney Tunes, yes, but it's also just full of people who go to work and raise a family and, play sports and love the outdoors and, don't have to deal with mosquitoes very often. It's a paradise. But that California has been pretty much priced out. So you guys complain about Californians. Places like Pittsburgh, where I grew up, or other lower cost, but kind of proximate to city, used to be factory towns, have been decimated. The biggest employer left in Pittsburgh when I was there was Dow Chemical, Fiberboard, Mansville, big utility, U.S. Steel, all kinds of named Union Carbide. It was the sort of New Jersey of the Bay Area in terms of factories. All of them are gone, 100%. The biggest employer is now the school district, kind of like Flint, Michigan. And so the devastation that we've seen in my lifetime has been near complete in terms of wiping out higher value, higher paid union jobs, accessible to people who either didn't have a high school degree, both my grandfathers, or just a high school degree, my dad. So what I do is get permits to build stuff, housing, infrastructure, power plants, hospitals, freeways, and building anything in California is a blood sport. And the fact that we need a lawyer like me, or the 30 people now who work with me just in my firm, let alone the many other lawyers in the state who do this work, is testament to how hard it is to build stuff. And mostly it takes us 10, 20, 30 years to build stuff. And if you need something built, like a home or a way to get to work or a decent factory job that you don't have to have a fancy degree to qualify for a living wage, then you're hurt by our refusal to build. If you're older, if you're ideologically now questioning the value of people, aren't we over our holding capacity, the state, the country, on the globe, then not building stuff is a victory every day. And our legal system is set up to preserve the status quo. Preserving the status quo in the name of the environment, in my space, has winners and losers. And people who need stuff to work, who don't already own a home, who haven't retired, who don't have secure jobs, they kind of need stuff. And those are the people who are hurt when we won't build anything for them. And that's a big difference with Texas. I don't think it actually occurs to most people in the state from either party that, yeah, we don't really care that, we're running out of water, or, we got all these people who don't have a place to live. I think the idea in Texas is we got to deal with it. We got to address it. We want economic mobility, we want upward mobility, we want prosperity, we want access to prosperity. That is not a shared value at all in California. And in fact, the sort of newest mantra in California, far left dominant circles of our legislature, is we're in a post-job economy. Between AI and robotics, jobs will soon be a thing of the past. So really we should focus on increasing tax revenue and then redistributing collected taxes based on a sort of top-down decision about who should get what that has been collected. So that's just a very radical foreign concept. And when Joel approached me about this study, and Carla and others here played instrumental roles in making it all happen. Yeah, there you go. What struck me specifically was how vastly different the opportunities and quality of life is for Latinos across different parts of the country. Home ownership is not unattainable in many parts of the country, especially if you're willing to have two people work for a while. Sometimes two people work 3 jobs for a while. Even if you have two people work 3 jobs in California for a while, it's not going to happen. Our now median home price statewide, including taking into account much less costly locations, is edging toward $800,000. It costs us $800,000 to build a 1-bedroom, deed-restricted apartment that is available only for a low-income household. We have piled on so much cost burden, more than $100,000 in fees per home, that the idea of affordable housing is like crazy. And that's just not true in most of the rest of the country. Just like, you know, I feel like I've stepped back into a science fiction movie when I see the cost of gas here, or electricity, or job opportunities, or new factories being built. And in many parts of the country, that's true. And I think what our data shows, and I'll close with this, is Latinos are sort of, generally speaking, incredibly aligned with the American dream. Hardworking, you know, a higher percentage than our population working in the military or in, you know, as cops or public safety people. Upward mobility is a thing. And, you know, earning enough to buy a home and have a car or a truck, and making sure your kids get through school. These are shared values, and they're shared social values. And yeah, there might be some kind of right-leaning or left-leaning cultural choices, and people have a little bit of a difference in terms of, you know, which church or how much church, but it's a shared and very much value-aligned population, and it's okay. It's okay to be a Latino and live in much of the country. It's hard. Some places it's harder. But in California, it's now impossible. And it's impossible because of policy choices made by left-leaning leaders in a whole sequence of arenas that have said, sure, for the privilege of being able to live where I live, the first thing you need to do is put $100,000 into the pocket of local government before you buy the land, build the home, pay the labor. That's just a price. I call it a country club initiation fee, just to live. And that could not be more exclusionary. In the old civil rights era, in Jim Crow, there were all kinds of things that different places in the United States did to make it hard, if not impossible, for Black or Latino or Asian residents to live. They used to call them sundown towns because there was never a place to live. Racial exclusionary zoning, there was a whole bunch of like just economic obstacles, like minimum lot sizes that said, you know, only big homes are welcome here. The explicit racial exclusion covenants, which are still on the books all over the place in California, those are illegal. But all of the economic choices we made are not illegal. And in particular in the climate arena, and this is my closing comment, the data we assembled showed that California's greenhouse gas net zero type policy choices had a huge negative regressive impact. And that's written up in an article called Green Jim Crow, where we're shutting down, deindustrializing higher wage jobs that are more available to people without fancy degrees. We're increasing utility costs and fuel costs, which you don't have a little choice but to pay. But I'm like, why why is my party choosing to do these policy choices instead of, reducing greenhouse gas where it's a heck of a lot less expensive to do so? And sure enough, when our state agency in charge of climate updated its climate plan, it said in black and white, page 57 and 58, in 2 successive paragraphs, policy choices that we are adopting will cause middle and lower income families to lose an aggregate of more than $5 billion a year. It will be that much more expensive for families at that income level. Wealthier families, no problemo. We're actually thinking you might save some money. How exciting. Next paragraph. Because of California's demographics, the policy choices we're making that cause this disparate cost on middle and lower income families does rest disproportionately on the backs of Latino, Black, and the lowest income of the Asian subgroup. So we're sorry about that. It's kind of just an accident of California's demography that we're inflicting harms on lower and middle income households, and disproportionately those harms are falling on Black and brown people. This is black and white, and then unanimously approved by California's left leadership. That's not where the rest of the country is. Our data show what is still possible in America, and I'm very, very excited to be here and start the day off on discussion about what are we doing and how do we make sure that this California trend, because California's cool, right? Everybody, let's do California. Oh yeah, they know what they're doing. The environment ed. No, look at who's harmed. Is that really what you want to do? And when it comes down to it, most people don't want to do it, but they also aren't comfortable about, fossil fuels or the environment. And I don't understand. Let's just let the experts. Don't let the experts. California kept schools shut down nearly 2 years because of the experts. It's important to question the experts, and I'll shut down. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer will join our panel. One of the things that we really pride ourselves at Civitas is to try to do original research and don't say things that you cannot prove, okay? So one of the first things we want to do, this first panel, we're going to say, okay, what is it that Latinos think, what do they want? And the second panel will deal with what sort of economic policies would be most efficient. So we have Lynette Sanchez, who's a PhD student here at the University of Texas. She's worked with the survey research team here, which was just terrific. In the report, there are numerous things that we cite from that. And if you want, at some point, you can send, if you're interested, just let us know and we'll send you all the findings. So I'd just like to have, now Lynette, I think, comes from Chicago, so that's another major center of Latino influence. So Lynette's going to share some of the findings that we had, and then she'll join the panel and we'll open up the discussion. So.
Yeah.
Okay, let me know if I'm too loud. Okay. Hi everybody, my name is Lynette Sanchez and I am a third-year government PhD student here at UT Austin. And today I'm going to be presenting the results of the Civitas Latino survey that was launched last May. So just to get us a little bit acquainted with the data, I am going to go through some descriptives about the Latinos that took our survey. So here we see that 83% of Latinos that took the survey were born in the US, 7% were born in Puerto Rico, and then 10% were born outside of the US. And then when kind of looking at the distribution about where Latinos' parents were born, here we see that 44% had both parents born in the US, 33% had both born in another country, and then 23% had one parent born in the mainland US and one parent born outside. When also looking at the distribution of the different countries of origin that were represented in our survey, Here we see that Mexico, 47% of our respondents were Mexican, 21% were from Puerto Rico, and then a smaller percentage from different countries. And then when concerning citizenship status, 79% of the Latinos were native-born citizens, 13% were naturalized, and then 4% were legal permanent residents, and 5% were other status. And then here we see in the language usage, it was also very diverse. So 15% said they never spoke Spanish, 46% said every day, and 22% said a few times per month. And then when concerning, this is more based on like census data, but we know that the US labor force is mathematically dependent on Latinos for survival, right? So the total US population is projected to grow by only 26 million through 2060. And without Latinos, the US enters demographic contraction. And we really see here that Latinos are the future solvency of Social Security. And this wasn't specific to the Latino pool, this was another like general national survey that we had. But we see that the national public is 63% agree with increasing border security, 45% with finishing the border wall, 45% with deporting all undocumented immigrants. And this is again based on the national survey, not just Latinos, but just to acquaint us with immigration attitudes around the country. But then at the same time, we also see that the national sample, right, supports supportive immigration policies. So 72% support those who arrive legally, and they're very supportive of pathways to citizenship and support. So 54% approve of a citizenship path for those in the US for the past 5 years, and those who were brought to the US as children. And there's also this really strong support for dreamers, right, in this national sample, with 67% of respondents favoring a path for citizenship for undocumented individuals. And there's 55% that support increasing legal immigration through family and employment visas. So back to our Latino poll, we see that Latinos are a card-dependent workforce that believe in hard work. Right, so 74% of Latinos believe hard work is equally or more important than outside forces. And then when asking about the commute, 76% of Latinos said that they drove alone versus 16% that said public transit. There were also like a variety of different occupations that Latinos stated that they participated in: 16% retail, 12% construction, 11% healthcare. And then 61% said that not owning a car would be a major problem. And then the survey also asked about the housing situation of Latinos. So here we see that 37% owned a single family home, 31% rented a single family home, and when concerning the multifamily apartment, 27% owned it, and then 2% rented this multifamily apartment. The survey also asked Latinos about their moving history, so how many times have you moved in your lifetime? So here we see that 6% moved more than 10 times, 40% moved 3 to 5 times, and then 26% moved 1 to 2 times. And we also asked them for specific data on their approximate dates for their last 2 moves. So 23% said 2010 to 2019, and then 17% said that they moved in 2024. And there was a smaller percentage like throughout the years. When asking Latinos about future moves, we asked them, would you plan to move in the future? And then 76% said yes, and 24% said no. And then we also asked another question, do you think that you will ever live in your own home? And then 73% said yes, and 27% said no. And then we asked a follow-up, like, why not? And then 76% said that the prices of homes would be too high. And then there were other reasons, such as property taxes being too high, not enough homes like that available, and that they wouldn't allow people like them in the neighborhood. And 10% selected another reason. And overall, we see from the US, right, that the center of gravity is shifting from the border to new destinations. So while density may remain the highest on the border in cities like Rio Grande City that are 97% Latino, the fastest growth is happening in markets with historically low Latino populations, and we also see this migration trend. And net domestic migration markets with fewer than 1 million residents, and Latinos are moving to suburbs and rural areas for affordability. And we also see like the new destinations, so the fastest growth rates have like the states in stripes, right? And then the traditional hubs have been are in blue. And we also saw from our survey that there really is this affordability crisis, right? So 79% of Latinos want their next move to be a single family home. And 73% believe that they will reach their dream home. All right, like the barrier is that prices of homes are too high. And despite these barriers, Latinos also reported that they were extremely or very satisfied with their current neighborhood, which is also really interesting. And something else that our survey found is that there is structural anxiety despite personal resilience. While 74% of Latinos believe in hard work, nearly half of Latinos fear structural economic headwinds will derail the next generation. So this came across in questions like 45% of Latinos believe that their children will be worse off financially. 34% said it is not very likely that their children will be able to afford a home by the age of 30, which is a bit concerning. And then this isn't very new, right? But economic pragmatism drives migration, not necessarily cultural affinity. So here we see the main reason for the last move within the US for Latinos. 24% wanted a bigger, better home, 18% wanted an affordable, better place to live, and only 2% really wanted to move to be around more people like them. And then when thinking about the main reason for why these Latinos moved to the US, 34% said that their parents brought them as a child, another 24% said jobs or economic opportunities, and 12% to join family. And a key statistic is that 56% of Latinos rate affordability of housing as extremely important for moving, and yes, only 14% say the same for being around people who share the background. Right, and it is really inflation and cost of living that is driving the Latino vote at the moment, and we saw this in the exit polls, right? Latinos, 85% said that the economy and inflation was very important to them. And this is very consistent with our May 2025 survey, where 81% of Latinos cited affordability as the most important aspect for their living situation. And then right again, 76% of Latinos said that the price of home was the #1 barrier to their American dream. So here we really see that economic pragmatism is more important to Latinos at this moment than necessarily ethnic solidarity. And the price of groceries was something that they really cared about. And we also had another section of the survey where we asked Latinos, like, where would you want to currently move to? So 31% said the local area where they currently live, 13% said suburban area, 12% said Northeast. And then walking through a lot of the other categories, a smaller percentage of Latinos said they want to move to the West Coast, rural area, small town, Southwest. They just wanted a warmer climate, southern states. No preference, don't know, Pacific Northwest, mountain region, and Midwest, or another location. And then we also asked Latinos the factors for the future moves. So we asked them, how important are the following factors when considering the move? So when concerning neighborhood safety, 57% said that was extremely important. Affordability of housing, 56% said that was extremely important. And right, the percentages were kind of a little bit varied when it came to these other factors, such as job opportunities, school qualities, availability of amenities and services, quality of public transportation, proximity to family and friends. And then a smaller percentage, right, said that it was extremely important for them to be around people who shared their background, or they prefer to be around people who share their political views. We also asked Latinos about their satisfaction with their living situation. So we asked them, what aspects of your situation do you consider most important? So 81% said affordability or cost of living, and then right, a much smaller percentage cited the proximity to work, safety or low crime rate, proximity to family and friends, quality of schools, outdoor space, size of home, and access to healthcare services or public transit. Let's skip forward to that one. And then something else that was really interesting about the survey is that not as many Latinos are relying on Univision, the Spanish language largest TV network, for their news solely. So they're increasingly relying on Facebook, ABC, Talk Radio, Twitter, and Fox. But yeah, that mirrors the general population. And then we also saw that Latinos are an electorate more moderate than the parties that they support. So we saw that 50% identified as Democrat, 28% as Republican, 22% as independent. While we were looking at ideology, only 24% said liberal, 47% said moderate, 26% conservative. So we kind of see how there's a significant misalignment. So overall, we see that Latinos are a strong presence in our economy and in the labor force, and that Latinos tend to move because they want a bigger home, affordability, or because of change in their life situation. And we also see through our data that Latinos want their next move to be a single-family home, but they cite affordability as a main concern. So as Latinos continue to have bigger impacts on politics and economy, more attention should be paid to studying the Latino community, the political wants and needs. But yeah, thank you so much, and I appreciate you all listening.
Hi, so we're going to start the panel, just to explain the logic. Besides doing the quantitative research, we did qualitative research, and we did 2 focus groups. Erica Ozuna, who I have to brag, she was my student at Pepperdine many years ago, who ran the one in San Antonio, and Carla Lopez Del Rio, who I do a lot of work with now, is very expert on the housing situation, particularly in Orange County and the Inland Empire. And we did one in Riverside. People say, well, why did you do it in Riverside instead of doing it in Los Angeles? Because that's where Latinos are moving. A friend of mine who went to school there 30 years ago at Riverside High School, she and her sister were the only Latinos at the school. Now the school is like 70% Latino. So I thought that I wanted to go to where people were going aspirationally, as opposed to people who they're in LA because the family's been there a long time, and also to reflect the fact that the majority of Latinos neither live in the countryside or in the barrio. They actually live in the same neighborhoods where basically most of the American population is. So what I'd like to do is ask Erica to talk a little bit about San Antonio, then Carla will talk about Riverside, and then the 3 of them will sort of be ready to deal with your questions. Hopefully we stimulated something. So.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erica Ozuna, and I was the lead researcher for this project. Basically, the research consisted on Latino politics, education, immigration, values, economics, transportation, and home ownership. I did all the general research, numerous articles, reports, everything. And to complement the research, as Joel said, we included the focus groups. So I did the one in San Antonio, and most of the participants were from San Antonio, we had a participant from the Rio Grande Valley, which you'll hear later on in the second panel, everything about the valley too. So basically the key targets for the focus groups were to know their views of the economic future, the perception of the place or city where they live, and their sense of opportunities to achieve the American dream. And I recently visited Mexico City, and I was explaining to my friend what I was gonna do, and she's like, well, what exactly is the American dream? So I found a beautiful description from the George W. Bush Presidential Center that says, the American dream is generally the North American belief that prosperity, success, and upward mobility are achievable for anyone through hard work, determination, and initiative, regardless of the background or birth circumstances. Rooted in the Declaration of Independence, it traditionally emphasizes homeownership, financial security, and the freedom to build a better life for oneself or one's children. So having said that, that was our focus for the San Antonio focus group, where most of the participants remain very optimistic about achieving the American dream or having their children achieve. I'm going to quote several of the participants, that way you get a feel or a sense of our discussion. We had a long list of questions and things we wanted to discuss, but we ran out of time. We focused, and most of the conversation was about the American dream and most of their optimism about, I don't know if it's just Texas, like Jennifer was saying, that it's not the case of California, but it was very interesting. So Mario is a former Navy officer who has also worked in education and was focused on the economic development of the Rio Grande Valley and the northern part of the state of Tamaulipas in Mexico. And his quote, quoting him, is that, "I'm very optimistic that that's not the norm. In South Texas, the reason we created a task force is that we have 27% poverty as compared to San Antonio with only 18% poverty. To deal with this issue, we are promoting economic development in the area and the high school dropout recovery program, which in the state of Texas, if you drop out of high school, you can go back and the state will pay for it. We've created the Possible Dream Adult High School Program, which is to be able for high school dropouts to go back and complete their high school degree. And Mario was mostly concerned about how the federal and state budgets would affect services to the Latino community. Rick is a financial advisor, and he's first generation here in the US, but both parents were from Mexico. And his highlighted quote was, "Nobody's graduating at a faster rate than Hispanic Latinos. So they are very capable and nobody's doing it, from what I've heard, more than the ladies, like the ladies right here in the focus group, which is Hispanic or Latinas outpacing everybody else in graduation. I feel very blessed that my biggest question to my kids was not, are you going to go to school? It was, where do you want to go to school? These are some of the things that drive my optimism. First was education, second family, and third Latinas leading success. And we have an obligation to be an example." So very optimistic, very great input for our focus group was Rick. We also had Sikira. She's a project cost accountant in the transportation industry, and she's from Venezuela. She emphasized that the Latino community needs to have a change in mentality and seize the opportunities. She provided examples of her company offering scholarships to take classes, but none of her Latino coworkers applied for this scholarship. So she was also very diligent in emphasizing that we have the opportunities, we need to pursue them. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we had a PhD who works in higher education, and she was more concerned and worried about the education budget affecting Latinos' access to higher education and the representation in the higher education staff. Monica is a psychologist employed in the healthcare sector and previously in education for special needs students. She was also very optimistic, and she says, if you look around the city today, there are far more options for Latino families than when I first moved here. She also says, before the pandemic, many service providers avoided certain neighborhoods, and hiring or retaining staff was a major challenge. Now people are moving outward outwards in all directions, and with the developments taking place, it's great to see so many more options available for families across the city. Monica pointed out that the diversity is missing in rooms where any sort of big decisions happen. And then lastly, Cecilia is a landscape architect with a master's degree, and her highlighted quote was, "I can speak about aesthetics and what I see in terms of equity, things like access to parks or such. I'm currently working on local landscape architecture of the 150-acre Arboretum project, the first destination in South San Antonio. In terms of quality in my industry, I'm not super optimistic, but we try to change it in terms of access." So my 3 takeaway points from the focus groups was, 1, all stated that a family or a family member was crucial for them to obtain a college degree and achieve success. 2, the participants in the education sector were less optimistic than those employed in the private sector. And the 3rd takeaway is that they all agreed the importance of having mentors and being mentors to the younger generation.
The focus group that we had in Riverside was extremely dynamic as well. We had an immigration lawyer, first generation immigration lawyer. We had a retired reporter. We also had a data analyst, financial advisor, maybe in her 20s. So it was very diverse, both in many ways, but age and the backgrounds of what people did was very diverse. We held it in the, here, okay, sorry. Is there something I can do to make it better?
Keeping it close to your face. Yes, ma'am.
Keeping it close to my face, okay. So, very much like, so we held the focus group in the Civil Rights Institute in Riverside County. And very much the way that, and Eric and I did not speak to each other. We did not plan anything together. These were 2 very separate groups by 2 very different Latinas that landed very much on optimism. And I honestly was not hoping or not thinking that would happen because of the current state of affairs of, Latinos, how they're talked about and in media. In some of our neighborhoods, some of our neighbors really have, are not welcoming, but the majority of the conversation did not focus on that. It really did focus on, look, they may not see us as valuable today, but we know we are valuable. And there are many people who do see us valuable, as very valuable. So we need to lean on that, and we need to focus on working together with them. So optimism really in our Hispanic culture really is about the children. Moms will do what they need to do for their children. I know that I am that way. We will work, we will commute, we will sell things, we will be entrepreneurial. And that's one of the things that came up in the focus group. The Latinas here in the United States, very different from where I come from in Mexico City, are the motor of entrepreneurship. It's clear. And so there's a different type of reality for women in the United States. My example would be, not only do we care about homeownership here in the United States, we care about homeownership in general because we know in our countries it's almost impossible to buy a house. If you want to buy a house in Mexico City, where I'm from, either you buy it cash or you inherit it. But buying your own house, we're pretty much a country of renters. And that's what we as immigrants know, that owning land is extremely important. So the American dream and the promise of the American dream as a homeownership dream, at the core, was very much in this focus that homeownership at the end of the day, we're for those homes, and that's what Latinos want. We're building a lot of multifamilies, which are very important for transitioning into a family, but they don't see themselves living in 2-bedroom apartments with their children. We love open space. And the Inland Empire is a testament to that. We do have small pockets of California that still builds some single family. They sell like pancakes, and Latinos are all over those homes all the time. And we build them, so we know where they are, we know what we want, we know how to make them. They don't let us build it. Education was extremely important as well in the focus group. One of the very telling story about Latino education is the moms know, and the dads too. They're not all Latinos are supportive of education. Now, I would say some Latinos do focus more on hard work and the trades, and there's nothing wrong with that. And we're really hoping to see more plumbers, more electricians, more solderers. There's a lot of need in these positions, and you can make a nice living out of having your own business. And we see Latinos now having contracting businesses, really leaning into the things that we're really good at and the position that the value we have brought to the U.S. So the issues that they were talking about were almost not very particular to Latinos. What they talked about, affordability is one of the problems, lack of education is another one of the problems. They started realizing on their own that these are the problems of almost all new immigrants into the country. And they worry that if Latinos are not making it, we're starting to see waves of new immigrants coming from other parts of the world. For example, I sold my starter home in the Inland Empire to a young family of Egyptians. And the wife does not speak the language very well. I can see their struggle, as my struggle was when I came when I was 15. And I can see their desire for a beautiful neighborhood in which we lived and to build it together. Mentorship was extremely important in this case. Somebody that can hold your hand, somebody that you can trust. Latinos, we have to do a better job of being more civically engaged. And I know that we work many jobs, we cannot show up, but we need to ask for those avenues of civic engagement. And the reason why it was so important to have those comments about the importance of mentorship was the recognition that Latinos, we are extremely diverse. And when we get together, it's not a homogeneous group at all. I'm part of civic engagement in a network called Las Comadres, which is a national group that was founded by Nora Comstock, who's here in the audience. And when we get together in our homes, we're about 12,000 women around the country who open their homes, and we host each other, and we literally go 3 minutes each. What are you working on? It's all about you, a comadre, a woman. What are you working on? What are you hoping for? And I hear these conversations in that light, that civic engagement, when we get together, we are Republicans, we're Democrats, we're nonpartisan like I am, and we really do lean on each other. We really do learn from each other. We do business with each other. We learn about each other's projects. I introduce some of the people for my research, and that focus group really exemplified that what I live, what I hear, the diversity of who we are. The focus group really mentioned this is very important, that we continue to meet civically, that we talk through our differences, but that we do focus on the things that we have in common, which is we want a better life, safe, clean, well-educated, citizens. We want to continue to contribute our value. And let's see. Last thing I wanted to say was, when you go home after these panels, you think, I should have said this. And so I'm sure that's the one thing that is escaping me right now. But I do want to say that Latinos are the future. At least in California, we're going to be more than 50% of the population. If we don't do well, California will not do well. And as Jennifer pointed out, things are not in our favor, specifically economically, not in our favor. And that's where we want to be most vocal. I think that we establish our value through these panels and this research, but it's really the continuity of the people that met that day and how they are now relating to each other. That was the true value of these focus groups, that it really brought us back into discussions that are civil, that we do have differences. You can't, for example, in some of our meetings, civically, we can't talk about abortion. We just don't talk about it as women. We have very different points of view about that. And some other topics that are difficult for Latinas and Latinos to speak about. But when it comes to, and so those are differences, and I can tell you I have my own opinions, and my own family does not value sometimes my opinions. I don't value some of their opinions, but we hold together and we help each other out, and we pool money together for the first starter home for the first person that can make it. Let's, make a tamaliza so that we can send somebody to college. Like, we are there, we are present, we need to continue to double down on that positive. And so that's the discovery of the focus group.
Thank you very much. Jennifer will come back up. We have some time for questions. You can make the questions to any specific person or Melissa, I think, you.
Buenos días. Dr. Lourdes Rodriguez, I'm a public health researcher, and it is such a pleasure to see a bunch of Latinas out there representing. I have one comment and I have one question. In the comment, as a scholar, I know the importance of being scrupulous, like being so retentive with your methodology. And maybe I missed the slide with methodology, sample size, all of the shortcomings of the research methodology. So if it's anywhere in here or if any of the reports, I would appreciate seeing that, because for me, that is what sorts opinion from important findings. So maybe I missed it.
Yeah, it's a sample size of 1,000 Latinos. Yeah.
And how was the survey conducted? Was it, random sample?
Yeah, so we tried to get a national sample of Latinos, and I had slides up there kind of telling you about like the different distribution and how we did our best to try to get a diverse sample of Latinos and not just focus here in Texas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
We can talk more about methodology because I am such a geek with things.
Yeah. I
I
can also send you like the top lines and we can geek about it together.
Great, awesome.
Yeah.
All of us, I think I had the same question.
Yes.
And then for me, one of the things that you mentioned about sorting the opinion from the values was really important. Could you speak a little bit about in this moment, what do we need to do to create spaces for having the conversation about these findings? This is for all four of you, that help us differentiate between opinions, findings, and values.
Yeah, so, right, I was just presenting descriptive data, right? I haven't done a full-on analysis. This is just to get everybody a taste of what the data is, and also just to give people familiarity with the questions that are on there, to see if you as a researcher, you want to tap into some of these questions. And I think that Civitas is also really open to working with different departments in the university. But yeah, I think that this survey, I translated it from, I got I think a ChatGPT translation, and I went through it and I made sure that it was good for Spanish speakers, right? But yeah, I think we're open to really collaborating and working with other departments in the community.
Super quick, I'm in an extremely polarized environment. And so if you were to have a discussion about opinions and values, you would likely have a discussion about I want to be able to own a home, I need a car. And on the other side, you would have a discussion about our climate crisis makes it imperative that you live in a higher density apartment and take the bus. And those are opinions and values intermingled in a very tribalistic, fractured, one party discussion. And then, of course, the fracture gets bigger the further, the more diverse the party affiliation. But there really is a sense, and it's almost never discussed, which is one of the reasons I think this is so important, that, well, everybody's like me, right? And when it comes to really foundational issues, I see the Liberty sign, it is not the case that we are on the same page. And if we're not willing to say that and talk to each other about it, then we're not going to, I think, make progress. And when we don't make progress, people who need progress are hurt more than people who don't need progress. And that has an age, wealth, and color differential that we need to, I think, own.
We have a lot of questions, so,
Who do you want next?
who first come, first serve, I think.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Jennifer, with all the fires and everything in California and the mass deportation, who is going to rebuild those homes? Because if you talk about Texas, es puro Latino, mana. Wherever you go, construction site, es casi puro Latino. So, I mean, that has to have a tremendous impact on rebuilding California.
It's all Trump's fault. Because the climate crisis, because the deportation crisis, but for Trump, everything would be rebuilt today. And we start from that extreme and we go to the other extreme, which is, why don't we have a path for people to have a work permit? How stupid can we be? I mean, we need people, and these are good people, and they're hardworking, and we need them. And so why don't we allow that? And then we have pushback from, again, for multiple sources, which I think are most acutely visible when you get into a discussion, bipartisan discussion about, so what about enforcing against employers? Because if we started enforcing against employers, we would have a work permit program, in my humble judgment. So again, there are just these tribal truths held to be self-evident with religious fervor. And my people say it's this, and your people say it's that. And at the end of the day, nothing is good.
So how are you going to do it?
We're not going to do it. It's going to take decades. There's a new proposal for, I think it's a set of 8 or 10 homes in one of the valleys that was burned. And these are, by the way, in historically very fire-prone areas, but where there's a new road people want the government wants to have that would take away our own backyard. So how long in our court system is it going to take to resolve that conflict? And unless there's a road, there's not a house, there's not a structure. So the lawyers are going to the mats, and we charge by the hour.
Thank you for your comments and your research and your good work. Everybody, it seems the panel makes a case for education, that being very important. I appreciate the fact that more information on Latinos is very important. So this support, then this stands to reason that the Civitas Institute, after this conference, can recommend that we keep the Mexican American and Latino Studies Department, which provides this information and this educational things that we desperately need. That we also keep the Center for Mexican American Studies that's provided 50 years of excellent research and support for education, which has enabled that growth that you're talking about, our success getting into the university and graduating. But also, I would love it if the Civitas Institute would follow up on their excellent research on housing and the trades, because right now the state is getting ready to remove the ITI, the certification and licensing of immigrants that report under the ITIN to pay their taxes. If that is removed, then we're gonna remove a lot of plumbers, electricians, and HVAC contractors from construction in Texas. The home ownership is like, everybody talks about that, not only as stability, but, the American dream and being stable. That is also being removed from Texas because, now homeowners cannot purchase a home and mortgage a home if they have ITIN. So Civitas will do a marvelous job, recommending, as a result of this conference, the sustaining our programs at UT and also those two other issues recommended to policymakers. Thank you.
Another question. By the way, on issues of Civitas, none of us are full-time employees of Civitas, so you'll need to talk to them about that.
Your comments and your research are so very beautiful, and I appreciate the questions that have been asked, because we do want to know about the methodology and the different ways the qualitative and quantitative research work, as well as the framework. I spend the nights and days crying and praying for the over 18,000 people that are in detention centers. We might not have new houses. I see a lot of houses, buildings. We have so many cranes in Austin. But Texas leads the country in detainees. These people are incredible hard workers. They have passion in their lives, for their families, and their futures. And so I hope possibly the Civitas Institute can do something about this area of people that are the lifeblood of this country, of the world. So this is out of the subject, but you're talking about Latinos. There are a lot of Latinos in those private prisons and detention centers. So thank you for anything y'all can do with that.
I don't need a mic. Thank you. Hi, my name is Rachel Gonzalez Martin. I'm an affiliate of the Center for Global Business at Holmes and a faculty member of Latino Studies here on campus, just down the hall, or just down the way here. I have a couple of questions. So I thought it was really wonderful. I didn't catch your name.
I'm Lynette.
Oh, you're saying?
My name is Lynette.
Lynette. Carla, you were speaking a lot about what came from the focus group, and I just have to say, so much of that is a cultural difference. It isn't necessarily thinking about economics, it's really thinking about what cultural factors people bring with them. A few years ago, I wrote books focusing on cultural entrepreneurship and consumer citizenship in Latino communities, specifically focusing on this idea of what Latinos bring to the United States. And some people who never moved anywhere, who just were always here. So I have a few questions about, one, how did the project decide to compare Texas and California as sort of these spaces? Only because I'm from the Bay Area, I spent here 10 years at UT, and I'll be the first to tell you, people in Texas aren't looking to be compared to California. So I was really surprised when I saw a panel of people leading with this voice from California. I was like, did they tell the Tejanos that we're bringing Californians? So there's that one issue, right? Thinking about how those spaces became the spaces, and why San Antonio and Riverside as opposed to Oakland and Dallas, right? Thinking about geographies and cultural geographies. The other is, again, as a faculty member of Latino study, the word Latino kind of been used so generally, kind of like in terms of thinking about methods. I was wondering how y'all decided to craft the use of the word Latino versus one of the many other variants, particularly in Texas and the RGB Hispanic, right? And then even thinking about what are the demographic numbers of Mexican descent someone mentioned someone from Venezuela, someone mentioned someone from Mexico City. All of those communities have very different documented migratory histories, particularly with relationship to South America, Mexico, and the United States, where the education levels, the economic levels, the governmental structures are really different for bringing those people into the West. So I'm just wondering how, with your focus groups, you shook out kind of, okay, who are we gonna invite, how are we gonna do that, different educational levels, but then also really big Texas and California. What brings those two together in this conversation?
That's demographics.
Yeah, just really quickly, maybe Jennifer, my co-author, may have something to say, but these are the two big enchiladas, California and Texas. I mean, they're basically the two dominant states in the United States today, and they're both almost exactly 40, something around 40% Hispanic. Frankly, if we had the resources, I would have liked to have done a lot more in Florida, because that's another place, and of course, a very different community. But we wanted to find something that was as broad as we could find, and we thought that this was, that was the terminology that worked best, given what we were trying to do, because we were talking about people of descent from a particular part of the world. So, Jennifer, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, even from my mom's side of the family, which, I'm not Italian, I'm Sicilian, right? There's so many differences, and they're so important across so many factors. I think for me, one of the biggest reasons for the focus we had, although I too would have loved to have added not just Florida, but also a major Midwest city like Chicago, and yeah, even New York. And New York, I think, would have been very Puerto Rican centered, which would have been a whole different demographic. But again, very centric. I apologize, and I really am being expelled from this state tonight. So don't worry, I'm not going to invade your space permanently. But so many in California, including Latinos, believe socialism is the only answer. And anyone who's kind of lived with that system, my son, who was a jazz musician at Berkeley High School, had this remarkable experience, having, grown up pretty woke in the Berkeley school system, right? Our sister city, Berkeley's sister city, Havana, has a incredible jazz school for kids there. And so our kids go 1 week and spend a week in Havana with those kids who are poor as church mice. And we have to send tampons and toothpaste and reeds for saxophones and guitar strings. And they left Bernie Kratz, and they came back shouting from the windows of my Prius, "We love George W. Bush." And it was a window into a world that we talk about in California, but don't live. And we have differences. And we now have a very strong, and so the reason I mention that is that's weird. I think that's kind of weird in most of the United States. And Texas, we think of as like poor, victimized, Black and brown people in Texas. We're so sorry they have to live there. But actually people are living pretty well. And they can read. They can read. Your kids can read, our kids can't read. And so we're looking to make really basic comparisons, in part to pierce through California's arrogance and reputation. So that's overly brutal. And if we had the resources, we would have added more locations. But I respect absolutely the differences, but I wanted to just emphasize what a core difference in values, opinions, and prospects that the two states now have.
Wow. We have time for a couple more.
I have a question about the qualitative research.
Wait for the mic.
Okay, sure, thank you. I appreciate your candor, actually. I just want to say that, because I tend to have a lot of candor too. So I feel like we're related in that way. Sometimes not so good for me, but I still do it. So I was looking at the report, and I'd seen it before. And I guess my question is, I should say my name is Dr. Maria Cotera, and I am also a Mexican-American Latino Studies professor. Very proud, came here about 5 years ago, coming home to my dream job. I am a graduate from UT, I'm a Longhorn, tried and true, and a Stanford grad for my PhD. I wanted to ask about the qualitative side of this and the kind of basis for some of the important questions you're asking. And I really appreciate the work y'all have done. And I think it's important work. That's why it's really important to me when I look at this bibliography, I get a little concerned. Because Stan Steiner, I treat that as an archival document.
It was for the history part of it.
Yeah, but that is not updated history, sir. I apologize for interrupting.
Well, excuse me, but that section I wrote, that section was, here's the history. I don't even know if he's still alive.
Well, right, that's the problem, because there's a lot of history work that has been done. In fact, we're having a symposium. I invite all of you guys to the symposium, Anglos and Mexicans in the Making of Texas. It's right down the street, same day. You are welcome to come. It's free and open to the public. They will be discussing really foundational work about Texas by one of our own, David Montejano. And scholars from around the country will be coming to talk about the 40th anniversary of the 25th anniversary of the publication. I made him older than he was. 25th anniversary of the publication of the book. So with all due respect, I understand, I've read Stan Steiner's book, and I study movement history, and I consider that book as really critical to a certain political moment.
But that's what it was referring to.
But it does not represent the historiography of the present moment, and that is critical. And also I would expect to see much more social scientific and demographic, some of your work would have been critical to this. So what I worry about, right, is that findings being put out, right, that reflect people's feelings and preconceived opinions rather than the sort of extant scholarship. And it is very important to have fields, right, that can provide you with this. We would be delighted to work with you to help you, build up and beef up and bring up to date your bibliography. This is the kind of work we do. And so I really see the work we do as, contributing to the important work that you're doing. And I do think iconoclastic opinions are not a bad thing to shake things up. I totally agree with you. We do need to sort of think outside the box and all of this, but it should be grounded, right, in, the bibliography and the literature of the scholarship that has been conducted by PhDs and esteemed national scholars, for the last.
Do you have any idea of the caliber of the people in this room?
Absolutely.
And so I will just say to you, I am blown away because it's not what I do. I wanted to step into this role of looking at what are we doing in my backyard? And what I do is not what you do. And it would be so much better if you could do a way better job than we did. That would be so great if we could elaborate.
I want to clarify, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting that we could have done a better job than you did.
But I think you would have. Absolutely. You are superb. You all are in an academic environment that allows you to achieve excellence and a caliber of scholarship that was beyond the scope of what this could be.
But this should be that.
We're doing it.
Make it so.
Well, unfortunately, the university just announced that our department is closing, so that's the problem, right? But that's not what this is about, and I want to keep the focus on you. That was my only comment.
Okay, we have got to move along. Give one more question. You'll take that one.
Just quickly on the skilled trades, I wonder if you could talk a little more about that. Are there positive trends of more Latinos in the skilled trades? What are you hopeful about that as a path to prosperity?
Yes, and what we're seeing is in the school systems, we're starting to see much more respect for for the trades. We're starting to see a value to it, and there are many programs in community colleges. Those resources are coming, and we are building them, but they are not enough. Like the housing problem that we're trying to point out about California is not to compare ourselves, but I speak of Mexico City as my point of reference when I speak to other people. And I would say the same, don't make the same mistakes that we've made in Mexico City. Where, I mean, if you go back now, there are many places that no longer look like Mexico City because Mexicans cannot buy in their own country. So I think the comparison between California and Texas is demographically moved. And if there are funders here in the audience who are noticing, didn't I tell you Latinos don't agree on everything? And I don't know if you've noticed, but most of the people who have spoken up today are Latinos, are very passionate, and we help each other out. Because now I'm going to be calling you and asking you questions so that you can guide me, and hopefully you can see some of the work I've done. But one of the things that I really want to point out is the reason why I think I've been shaped this way to question things is because I have seen very noble causes carry a lot of damage. So we did have a Green Party in Mexico that was corrupt to its core. And they did a lot of work in the name of the environment, and nothing has really come out of it for Mexican citizens. And Mexico loves to copy California and the United States. So I'm seeing these trends, and I'm trying to bring awareness that all of these different points of view must be spoken about. One of the pieces that we wrote in the California Latino study before this national study was the fact that somebody, a Latina, started questioning the quality of the education. And she ran a sample of all the schools that are Chavez. Cesar Chavez schools, all of them, failed to pass reading and math. But when they come and they open these schools and they make a lot of lip service to Latinos that are not coming through with real results, we are starting to question some of those things. We're starting to question the environmental laws, we're starting to question the educational policies because they're not working for our families. So I think it's important that these discussions continue to be as heated as they need to be.
I also wanted to say that my advisor is in the Mexican American and Latino Studies program. I'm a third-year government PhD student, and I'm obviously learning. So I thank you all for coming.
Just before we go to the next speaker, just a few facts. Latinos have a great opportunity because they're already in the trades, they're gaining into the trades, and in the AI universe, the trades are really going to be the place for a lot of people for upward mobility. I'm not so sure it's so good to be a geek. And I think that what we're going to see, and what we're seeing, is the enormous shortages in the reindustrialization of the United States. The industrial workforce is getting very old. And what I see here in Texas, and I also see in other parts of the country, is a lot of young Latinos are sort of like, they get the idea that, really, it's going to be a long time before we have a robot who can replace a plumber. A robot who can replace, a bullshitting academic, that's a different story. Anyway, I want to thank you and thank the panel and turn it over to Mike Tom.
Turned out. I'm Mike Toth, extremely excited to introduce our next speaker and our next panel. So first on our next speaker, it's our honor to welcome Dr. Luis, who is coming to us today from the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. Dr. Torres has an incredible academic background and professional development. Received his PhD from the University of Colorado Boulder and his undergraduate degree in economics from the Monterrey Institute of Technology in Mexico. Dr. Torres is an expert on the Texas economy, Texas-Mexico relations and trade relations, and he's going to provide a regional economic update for us. Dr. Torres will focus on the economic update in this area, and then after Dr. Torres is done, we'll have our next panel on what Latinos need. And for that panel, we've got Salvador Contreras, who's a professor at the University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley. We've got Joel Cocken, my colleague at the Civitas Institute, who is published in so many publications, including the new California Post, which just started a few weeks ago. So congrats on that, Joel. And then David Cisneros, who's a managing partner at Romulus, which is a very cutting edge real estate company. We'll hear more about what they're doing in the housing space, very important. And then after Dr. Torres does his economic presentation, we roll into the second panel. We'll have time for Q&A. Great discussion throughout the first panel. Let's, for the Q&A section with our second panel, just focus on questions. So please put your comments in the form of a quick question. That way we can get through more questions with our great panelists. With that, I'll pass the mic to Dr. Torres.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Joel. I'm sorry, it's been a long time since we seen. He's a great friend. When I was still, sorry, I'm going to say a bad word. When I was still working at Texas A&M University. So oops. So let's talk about what's happening in Texas. So again, we know 2025. If one word can summarize 2025, let's use 2 words. Uncertainty, right? And why? Tariffs, right? And that had a lot of effects on the world, US, Texas economy, Austin economy, right? That's why the title right there says the twist and turns of 2025 and looking ahead for 2026. Before I start, I like my job. I have I was talking to Austin McClay a minute ago. I have 3 kids, right? And it's a couple of years, maybe 1 year or 2 years, 2 of them are going to go to college. So I don't want to lose my job, right? So yes, so what I say right now, it's me, it's Luis Torres. Even if I mistakenly say we, it's still Luis, right? There's no Fed here. I do not represent the board or my president, Lori Logan, right? So just to give you a big overview of what happened, right? Something really interesting happened, unfortunately. Not definitely good, but Texas economy is still in 2025. And what's interesting is we still had a solid GDP growth rate, although the news today that came out, right, it was kind of lower than expected. But what's interesting for Texas, Joel, I've been with Joel, we've done a couple of, various presentations, talks before. I would talk about Texas, right, the growth in Texas, employment growth, the activity. This is not a typo. There was 0 job growth in the state of Texas in 2025. Let me repeat that. 0 job growth in Texas in 2025. Why? Again, I mentioned this earlier, the tariffs, higher tariffs, falling immigration affecting supply of labor, the federal government cutbacks, widespread policy uncertainty, all that contributed to that lower growth that we saw in 2025. Again, Texas is a much diversified economy. We know that. We're not dependent on oil anymore as we were before the 80s, but we're still dependent. It's part of our economy. Again, job losses in energy, and something we saw here in Austin, the high-tech job losses continue, especially for the bigger firms. And again, we're going to talk about this, the downturn in residential construction that we see. Existing home sales in 2025 in Texas and in Austin were negative. home sales dropped last year in the Texas economy and the Austin economy. Just to give you an idea, an apartment right now, multifamily, we have a lot of inventory, is not doing that well also. So what does the outlook call? Good news, a pickup in growth. What are we seeing? The momentum in AI. The data centers, and I'm gonna show you the data center investment, the boom we're having here in Texas in AI and data center investment will carry forward. The big beautiful bill, the fiscal policy, capital expenditure expected to increase, easier financial conditions, deregulation, of course, and a little boom for 2026 will be definitely the demand side will be the FIFA World Cup, right? Again, what are the headwinds? Labor supply constraints. Why? Because of immigration policies. The residential housing market is still expected to be weak, low and really important, the cut to the safety net programs is going to affect a lot of lower income families, right? And something that's still causing uncertainty, although somebody a minute ago, we were talking about Mexico City. I was there last year. We talked to various sources. There's still optimism. There's optimism that USMCA will continue. Don't forget, everybody, I know you know this. What's the #1 exporting state in the country? Who exports more goods and services to the rest of the world? Texas. So USMCA is really important for us, for our economy. The good news, there's still uncertainty going forward, what's going to happen. A lot of people are talking about more structural change, probably changes, rules of origin implemented, constraints, but right now the signals are that from the U.S. side and people on the Mexico side said it should continue. Could be changed, but still USMCA should move forward, right? But still there's uncertainty there. So just to show you the numbers on the payroll, so this graph shows the blue bars are Texas job growth, red line is US. As you can see right away in the past, those blue bars, Texas, us, are normally higher than the red line, right? But look what happened actually in 2025, year-end employment growth, flat growth, 0.1. Same as the US, 0.1 employment growth for the US, 0.1 for Texas. Normally we grow at a higher rate than the rest, employment grows at a higher rate than the rest of the nation. But like I mentioned earlier, what's interesting, there's been productivity gains. We're not generating jobs, but GDP output is positive, solid. Those are the numbers for the US. So it's due to those productivity gains, and some of the argument is due to the AI part of the story of the economy. So this shows you by industry Texas employment. What do the numbers mean? We have a trade sector. Let's say trade, transportation, utilities says there's a number in the parentheses, 19.6. What does that mean? That means that almost 20% of the jobs in the state of Texas are trade, transportation, utility jobs. But you can see right away that the slowdown, the negative numbers are broad-based, right? Professional business services include tech, of course, government jobs, federal jobs, right? But the only two bright spots were right away, those blue lines that have a solid growth were healthcare jobs and construction jobs. And in a minute, I show you where those jobs are coming. They're not coming. He's going to say they're not coming from residential. They're coming from those data centers and also infrastructure jobs, water treatment plants, electricity, roads and highways. Just look at I-35, right? That's where the jobs are coming from. But Broadway's negative jobs for the state of Texas, right? Flat growth, 2025. So it's not a typo. We didn't grow in jobs in 2025. What's interesting, you've heard this in the news, that no hiring, but no firing mode, and it's true. The good news, yes, job growth did not increase, but the good news, unemployment also did not increase. Still low, 4.3%. It's increasing slightly, but still a really relatively low level. How about wages? Look at the number here for Texas, still solid number, 4.4 wage number, growth in wages above US, 3.7. So there's still some good news in the labor market. We're seeing more like a stabilized, the labor market is stabilizing, right? So interesting. This is an issue going forward affecting the supply of labor in the state of Texas. What's happening to domestic international migration? First of all, let me show you, this is Texas, the numbers for domestic and international. Normally domestic would drive the growth of jobs. You know, I was at A&M, we talked about, I was at the real estate center. We did a lot of research on the migration of people and families and businesses to the state of Texas, right? Of course, migration, domestic migration was a big momentum builder of migration to the state, right? Part of it, of course, 2024, it flipped. It was more international. 2025 still a little bit high, you know, it's still higher, but you can see the downturn in that migration, that supply is falling for the state of Texas. Expecting lower levels, definitely lower levels in 2026, both domestic and less international migration. And that will affect the supply. Again, this through time, that domestic migration to the state of Texas. Look at us, Texas and Florida, positive net migration, receivers of positive, and the negative, two states that people are losing, of course, California and New York. But you can see at the end, that slowed down. And if you look at the Austin numbers, same pattern, right? Domestic migration to Austin, other parts of the country, is also falling, and for the rest of the world. Our real estate, I mentioned this earlier, just looking at the employment numbers. Where does the growth comes from, right? The growth in employment jobs came from the construction and health sectors. Is there a construction boom? Let me show you the construction values, the actual how much is being produced in construction. We have total and residential. Look at residential. I mentioned this earlier. It's going down. And of course, I didn't plot a vertical line right there in 2022 when residential construction fell. What happened in 2022, everybody? The Fed did what? So don't forget, residential construction is really sensitive to changes in interest rates. You can see it in the numbers. All the numbers, I'm going to show you different graphs for housing sales. What happens always? 2022, you'll see the decline in housing sales. Why? Again, it's when the Fed starts its rates, it's hiking cycle, and interest rates start to increase, and that affects residential. It's always the first one to come down, when interest rates come down, go up, and the first one to come back when interest rates go down, right? Again, where is construction coming from? Non-residential, right? Residential down, it's non-residential, but what part of non-residential? Again, non-building. Again, the infrastructure, all these parts, the data centers, all these things I'm talking about. There's what that soaring non-building activity is coming from. And let me show you the number for the data centers. So it's outpacing overall construction since 2022. These are the values of this is it's indexed. How it's grown. It's still only 6% of total construction values, but it's outpacing that growth. Where is the growth coming from? Are those data centers? And just to compare, where are we in billions of dollars expenditures? We're behind Virginia, building data centers. Virginia's number 1, Texas number 2, in the building of data centers. Now, what's interesting, these are housing prices for Texas, US. Housing prices have actually dropped, are negative. Here, Texas is real, they're low. But if you look at repeat sales index, this is a repeat sales index, this is better than, in the middle I'll show you median prices. This is better because it tracks the same house through time. So you have a better idea what happening with housing prices. And you can see in case of just Dallas is negative. If I showed you Austin, a repeat sales index, it would also be negative. So price growth in 2025, housing prices in 2025 in Texas, so not Texas, still kind of positive, but in Austin, they were negative. Something that's really important is affecting all of us. I'm a homeowner, is the increasing with rising insurance costs. How much has risen in Texas? To show you from 2019 to 2024, insurance costs in Texas have increased by 58%. One of the highest in the nation. Second only probably is one of the, just Florida. Of course, they have more hurricanes than we do, right? That's a big issue for homeowners, no? And higher insurance costs, property taxes also. And the good news, delinquency rates, yes, they've risen, but they're below 2019 levels still. So not an issue on that front. And just as Texas, housing sales, we have the permits. Permits are down still. We're not building new homes. The housing sales, as you can see, are also kind of came up at the end, flat, a little bit positive, but overall negative for the year. That's good news. And again, what's the major factor? The 30-year mortgage rate is coming down, but still a higher rate. Of course, a lot of people locked in their mortgage, lower historical mortgage, before the Fed started raising the interest rates in 2022. So it's making it difficult for new home buyers to be interested in buying or selling their own home and buying a new home. These are median prices. Of course, Austin has the highest median price in the state of Texas, right? It's not California prices still, but they're high, right? And they look it down, kind of stabilized in 2025. Rents, also sectors not doing well. It's interesting to see apartment rents. These are rents year over year. You can see right away the biggest negative number is what's MSA? Austin. Why? Because of the inventory level, the increase in production and construction we had in years beforehand, and that's why you see, of course, supply demand, more supply than demand, and you still see those negative house apartment rents currently. Energy, we have to talk about those data centers. You're going to demand energy. What's going to happen, right? This is demand by ERCOT of those data centers. How much is going to increase? That's the adjusted forecast demand. They're forecasting in energy, electricity, and the other one is the unadjusted forecast they're expecting on us. So what's going to happen? Again, demand and supply. Are we ready for those data centers and the energy they're going to demand? And electricity prices. The good news right now, electricity is beginning to rise in some top data centers like Virginia, but less so in Texas right now. Of course, you can see California, right, has higher energy prices, but they don't consume as much as we do, right? The beautiful weather they have in California, and here we need AC, right, to supply during the summer. Oil prices, just talk about, I'll go fast. Oil prices, you're muted, the market, the weak market, right? Still low oil prices. Of course, that affects the Texas economy. And really important, something just to look at the tariffs. This is really interesting. These numbers are how much U.S. importing importing by the rest of by the world, Canada, China, of course. And this shows after the quarter. As you remember, the first quarter of 2025, a lot of companies knowing what was going to happen, what did they do? They inventories. They bought everything they could. They imported whatever they could. And of course, that caused first quarter GDP in our country to be negative. So this is after that. So what happened after they purchased all the goods, right, before Liberation Day, what has actually happened in imports and trade? So it's really interesting to see, like, world imports are down. Canada is down. China especially down. Of course, it's higher tariffs we put in China. But what's interesting, Mexico imports are actually up. But what's interesting, the composition has changed what we're importing from Mexico. Normally it was autos, transportation manufacturing goods. We're not importing from Mexico that. What are we importing? Computer and electronic products. Why is that, everybody? Because of the data centers. So the composition of trade with Mexico has also changed. That's interesting. And it's positive. Of course, USSA continues. So let me show you this really cool graph. This is the percentage of companies, let's say, the percentage of companies that are using USMCA to import. So USMCA has been there, right? 2010, SNAP. It's always been there. And companies, for Mexico imports, use USMCA to import a good 60% of the time. That's what this graph tells you. For Canada, 50% you use. If you import from Canada, you would use USMCA in NAFTA. But look what happened after Liberation Day. The jump in USMCA compliant imports increased. Why? Because of the tariffs. So now it's better to go all through the paperwork, do it through USMCA. Beforehand, these companies didn't need to do it to the USMCA. Now they're doing it. Look at the big jump. almost all 80% of the goods we import from Mexico are USMCA compliant. What does that mean? That they filled out the paperwork and they imported it through USMCA. So we have great surveys we do at the Dallas Fed. I would recommend you look at them. We ask Texas businesses what's happening. Here, what's interesting, we're separating firms that are being affected by tariffs, firms that weren't affected by tariffs. And what's interesting, despite tariffs, Texas firms see easing price growth going forward. The good news, beforehand, look at the price growth, especially if you're affected by tariffs. They're expecting 3.6, 3.2 increases in their selling prices, 3.5. The good news is dropped going forward. They were asked in December 25. That's good. The good news in the inflation front. So just to show you other surveys, really showing you the weakness in the labor market, especially in Texas. We asked Texas firms, are you going to hire workers? Only 44% said yes. That's the lowest since 2023. Okay, so no demand. So we also asked them, are there any impediments to hiring workers? Please select what are the impediments. And something that's really interesting that's consistent, that's been consistent through the years. You can ask small firms, large firms, they always talk about lack of technical competencies, hard skills. That's one of the major reasons they cannot find workers. The other one, we have other reasons, looking for more pay, lack of available applicants or no applicants, again, the supply of labor, right? We also asked them how's the ability of applicants changed over the past few months. What's interesting, it's improved. Why? Because, the labor market is slowing down, right? Our retention of workers is also improved. Why is that? People know that the labor market is not as easy to quit your job and find another job. So the retention of those workers has improved, right? And also just ask them about the capital expenditures part, especially after the big beautiful bill, if they're going to spend more. And most of them said yes, they will start to increase their growth in capital expenditures in 2026. Just to summarize real fast, the good news, Texas business report improving outlooks for 2026. Again, after Liberation Day, look at the outlook, future company outlook, future capital expenditures, future activity, it dropped down. But the good news right now, you can see how it changed, right? That outlook for 2026. Now, our forecast, we do a Texas employment forecast here at the Dallas Fed. We update it each month when new data comes out, employment data comes out from the Texas Workforce Commission. Right now, we have our employment at 1.1% for 2026. By the way, Texas, normally employment growth in Texas, historically an average grows 2%. So we're going to be below that 2%. In the case of Austin employment growth grows at a higher rate than Texas, grows 3%.
Is that Central Texas?
Austin, MSA. And something else, this is really important also, the percentage of Texans are not uninsured should increase healthcare. So we've always been higher in the country. Around 2024, around 17% of our population insured did not have healthcare. And it's expected to increase 20%, right, up to 2034. Just to summarize, we grew in Texas, but we didn't add jobs, zero job growth. And that hasn't happened since 2002, 2003. The good news, there's few signs of broad-based labor market slack, and unemployment remains low and stable. Job growth should pick up to 2022, but it'll be mild, below our historical average of 2%. Again, I mentioned this earlier, the productivity piece of the story has been strong, and of course it's surprised hiring, suppressing labor demand, while immigration is affecting labor supply. So again, a continuing AI boom, the Big Beautiful Act, right, will likely boost activity, while low prices, residential construction will be a drag on growth in 2026. Again, good news, DFA woke up a boost, short-term boost, expenditure boost, demand boost. But again, issues that we should be continuing to look at are the cuts in safety nets, right? Federal fund reductions, especially to healthcare and education. Thank you very much.
Senator, if you want to come on up. I think we just need to get Joel Cochran's presentation up. Thank you so much again for being with us and for staying for the Q&A. I also am not authorized to speak on behalf of the Fed, but I'd say you should get a promotion at the Fed. That was a fantastic presentation. There are 12 Federal Reserve banks across the United States. In places like Atlanta, Miami, San Francisco. I don't have them all memorized. But I think the Dallas Fed, from my opinion, has always done some of the most innovative and in-depth research, and your presentation just covering such a wide range was emblematic of that. So thanks again, Dr. Torres. Let's hold our questions for Dr. Torres till the end. We're going to roll right into Joel Cochran and then our other panelists.
Yeah, so just, this is going to be very brief. I want to stress this work is not about 1 year or 2 years. It's it's over what's happening over time. One thing that we try to communicate to people is the size of the Latino economy in the United States. It is larger than, it's the 5th largest economy in the world. So it's not an insignificant thing, to say the least. The share of the workforce, this is another issue. The share of the workforce in the United States that's Latinos, you can see what the growth is going to be. And we're looking at 2060, about 38% of the workforce being Latino. That's pretty significant. One of the most interesting things, and we've found this also in California, despite all the problems, the much faster growth of Hispanic-owned businesses, which is really a big factor. And I think one of the things that makes the whole issue of the political issues with Latinos different in that small business people tend to be much more conservative than people who work in larger bureaucracies. Hispanic men are significantly at a higher rate of workforce participation than the population in general. Again, this is one of the reasons why we keep stressing that the importance of the Latino community is not just that they have money or that they spend, but we need them in the workforce, and particularly if you look at things like construction or any of the skilled trades, which I think are going to be the place to be in the near future. We did this cost of living, what we found was when you factor in the cost of living, the average Latino in the state of Texas is making about $10,000 more than they are in California. But there were other states that they do much better. New Mexico, Oklahoma, Colorado, Pennsylvania. I mean, California, we really do a crappy job, I have to say. And the reason we do a crappy job is not because we're a crappy state, but because we have crappy policies. And that means that we basically suppress industrial growth, we suppress construction, and that happens to hit Latinos exactly where they're most concentrated. Same pattern with Latino-owned business. The other part of it is, if we look at home ownership, this is the key one, and it's about 45% in the state of California, but in the city of Los Angeles, which is the largest Latino city in the United States, it's around 37%. And if you look even deeper, what you find is older Latinos bought their homes when they were still affordable, so that the next generation is going to, I mean, their own hope is that there'll be some regulatory relief, and it will take place overwhelmingly in the Central Valley and in Riverside, San Bernardino. So if you look at California, there's a coast. Not one unionized construction worker can buy a median-priced house in any coastal county in California. We did a study on that. So the key thing is going to be in the interior, and that's why the issue of whether or not we're allowed to build on greenfield sites is sort of critical, and particularly critical for Latinos. This is controversial thing, but this is something that Jennifer and I talk about a great deal. Latinos are in the part of the economy where you generate carbon, particularly home construction, manufacturing, and of course, what we've done in the state of California, we're running about a 10-to-1 trade deficit with China, is we don't build anything, we don't produce anything. Well, we'll send them some almonds or something, but basically we have eviscerated the very areas that were leading to upward mobility. And just, I mean, I've been following this for almost 50 years, and it's particularly bad now. And this is one of the most interesting political questions in California, is the actual economic interest of the Latinos is very different than how they're voting, which is, you can explain it. I have enough trouble understanding my own tribe. And then you have a higher percentage here in Texas in manufacturing, construction, and transportation. And if Louis is correct, and we're going to have an AI boom and maybe construction will take place, if the interest rates go down, and because we have to ask Louis to do that. But if we get the interest rates to go down, there are going to be enormous opportunities for Latinos, particularly in places like Texas. But one thing to emphasize is a lot of this is taking place not in California, not in Texas. The real growth is in the Carolinas. Amazingly enough, Alabama and Arkansas. Alabama has a positive net immigration, I think for the first time since 1860. And so what we're seeing is, as Texas and Florida, if you want to put it this way, have filled out, grown a lot, they've slowed down. But the migration pattern of Latinos in particular to other states, particularly in the Midwest, my wife and I were in Savannah, Georgia, and drove to Charleston. Every single new restaurant in the Carolinas, that's what we think about. So that's just to give you a little bit of the perspective that's in the report, and now I'll turn it over to Mike. You have some slides? Yeah.
We need to queue up Salvador's slides.
Just click group, they're there.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, so thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Mike, Luis, David, Joel, for sharing the floor with me. I was asked to present a little bit about the Rio Grande Valley. I've not spent too much time, so I have to be really careful about how much data to present. So I'm gonna, hopefully I give you a sense of the essence of the Rio Grande Valley. This right here is a picture of Elsa, Texas. I took it from the website. You can see there the local Whataburger and a McDonald's across the street. There's an HEB somewhere, but it's a very small HEB in the town of Elsa. Elsa is in the county of Hidalgo. That's roughly about 6,000 inhabitants. So just to give you some sense of what I'm talking about, I'm talking about the Rio Grande Valley. Is the sort of the lowest part of the lower part of Texas, southernmost part of Texas, Cameron County, Hidalgo County, Starr County, and Williston County. So this is what generally is referred to as the Rio Grande Valley or the RGV. So I had a hard time thinking about, so what can I say in a few minutes to tell you about the richness of the area, and it's almost impossible. So I'm going to try to give you two statistics to try to give you some sense of the region. I'm talking about population, the economy, and some headwinds tied to what Luis was talking about in the area of construction. The area itself, just sort of to tell you, it's 90% Hispanic. 90% of that is of Mexican descent. So it's a high percentage of Hispanics, similar like El Paso would be, or Webb County where Laredo is at. It's a border region. So I wanted to tell you something about the population of the Rio Grande Valley. So Texas in general is a very young state. the median age is somewhere in the mid-30s. The Rio Grande Valley is slightly younger, roughly about 5 years younger. So here's the share of the population that is 15 to 25 years of age. The bottom line is Texas, the top line is the Rio Grande Valley, I guess the 4 counties. And you can see here that 14% of the population in Texas is 15 to 25, but it's 16.5 in the Rio Grande Valley. It's just much younger. The second thing you can get from this picture is that these, it's slightly declining in the state of Texas, but it's slightly upward slope in the Rio Grande Valley. So some schools, some public schools in the state of Texas have seen a decline in enrollment, for example. Not so in the Rio Grande Valley. UTRGV, where I'm employed, has seen continual increase in enrollment. The local community college, South Texas Community College, has also seen an increase in enrollment year over year. And they expect our school is planning for thousands of more students the following academic year. Oh, I should also mention, this picture on the right is Mariachi Aslan, is the UTRGV competition Mariachi team. This is during commencement, so starting the last spring, they started playing at the end of the commencement, which I thought was a really nice sort of touch. They play the mañanitas for the mothers during the spring commencement. So let me tell you a little bit about the population. So if we add up the population of the 4 counties, we're talking about 1.4 million individuals. So it's actually quite large. It's not small. It's a large population. Comparison, Texas is 31 billion individuals. If we look at the population growth over the last 15 years on an annual basis, Texas has grown slightly faster than the Rio Grande Valley has grown. So just to give you some sense of what that means, we use this sort of rule of 70 that economists generally use to estimate how long it will take to double the size of something. You see that at the current pace of population growth, it will take roughly about 80 years to go from 1.4 to 2.8 million inhabitants. Well, it'll only take half as long to go from 31 to 62 billion people in the state of Texas, if it continues to grow at this rate. And I think you mentioned that net migration into the state might be declining. So, all right. The second number I want to give you here is the real GDP for the area. So the GDP for the 4 counties is $40 billion compared to the $2.2 trillion of the size of Texas. If we look at the average annual growth rate of the economy, the sort of expansion of the economy in the Rio Grande Valley is growing at roughly 2% per year, which is actually very good. And most places in the U.S. would kill to have a growth rate of this nature. However, Texas by far is growing much faster during this period of time. So just to give you some sense of what that means, if the Rio Grande Valley wanted to double its size of its economy from 40 to 80 billion, it would take roughly 38 years to do so. But to double the GDP of Texas of 2.2 trillion to 4.4 trillion, it would only take 19 years. One way of saying that even though the Rio Grande Valley is growing and is probably growing much faster than other regions in the United States, is shrinking relative to the size of how much Texas is growing. And so there is some sort of leaving behind, if you like, the region. So I'll say a couple of things about the sort of components of GDP for the Rio Grande Valley. So what I did here, I compare an orange is Texas and the blue is the Rio Grande Valley, and this is the percentage of the share of the GDP. So for example, government represents 9% of the GDP in Texas. It represents close to 19% in the Rio Grande Valley. So government, education, and retail trade are big components of the economy, overwhelmingly much larger weight than they do in the state of Texas, which suggests that the region doesn't have the same level of economic development that the state of Texas has. These 3 areas represent something like 40% of the economy, is half that in the state of Texas. Areas like, for example, professional and business services, or manufacturing, which you would think have higher employed people with higher wages, are actually underrepresented in the Rio Grande Valley. So the manufacturing, for example, represents something like less than 5% of GDP, while it represents 12% in the state of Texas. And I believe that manufacturing is actually also a declining sort of sector in Texas in general, right? So the last thing I will mention here is construction. So Luis mentioned construction. Construction to the RGV is probably less to do with data centers, more to do with the type of construction that we sort of the freeways, expansions, but housing developments, etc. You'll notice here that the numbers are quite the same. So it's roughly about 5% of GDP, both in Texas and in the Rio Grande Valley. This number actually has gone up. So I made a presentation a few weeks ago where I had the 2023 numbers. And that number actually increased 140 basis points. Construction has been a very bright spot for the region. And I'll say more about that in a second. And then just sort of to tell you that there are differences within the Rio Grande Valley. So we have Cameron County, Hidalgo County, Stark County, and Williston County. Only here to mention just a couple of things. Hidalgo County is really the big county that makes up the Rio Grande Valley. The second thing to mention here is that most of the population growth is in Hidalgo County, not in the other 3 counties. And that the GDP growth is really only being carried by both Cameron County and Hidalgo County. Both Starr and Willacy are actually shrinking in a year-over-year basis. The third thing I want to tell you is that if you think about economic growth, there's sort of 2 ways you can get this. You can get it because there's just simply more population growth, more warm bodies need more stuff to consume, or you can get this because of improvements in labor productivity. If you were to take Cameron County's 2.3% growth and subtract out the population growth, you get something close to 2% growth. This is growth in labor productivity that we're seeing here. This is not what we're seeing in Hidalgo County. Hidalgo County is growing, but mainly because of population growth and less so because of improvements in labor productivity. This, to you and I, means improvements in wage growth. So sort of the average Hidalgian, for example, wage increases over the last 15 years has probably been less than 1% per year over the last 15 years. Well, it has been about 2% in Cameron County. And then there's a number of things to mention about Cameron County. We have SpaceX, LNG plants, ports, a number of big investments that have come to the region that potentially explain these level of performance. I'll say a couple more things about about population. So I took the incomes of individuals between the ages of 25 and 50. So just sort of looking at this prime age group and looking at the 20th, sort of the lowest earning 20th percentile, the minimum of the distribution, and the top 80th percentile. And you will notice here that at every category, individuals in the RGV earn lower wages. In the 20th percentile, you see here roughly about $6,000 less than the state. In the middle of the distribution, something like $15,000 less than in the state. And at the top of the distribution, something like $25,000 less than the state. So in general, the Rio Grande Valley's population earns much lower wages than people in the state of Texas. So just sort of to put it together with what I said earlier, even though the state is growing at a fast pace, even though the Rio Grande Valley is growing at a very nice clip itself, the divergence in the economic growth profiles are also going to make these numbers a size to be continue to grow. All right, I'm going to skip this. There was a recent article that came out on the Wall Street Journal about how immigration rates were affecting the South Texas economy. In this particular article, they were mentioning Montecielo housing development in the city of Weslaco. Weslaco is a city in the sort of southeastern part of Hidalgo County. And the story was about how these rates were affecting the construction industry and leading to delays in project completions. So there's fear of apprehensions, not only from unauthorized workers, but also from authorized workers because they just come and pick everybody up. So this effect has, sort of an effect on both upstream and downstream markets. So it has sort of broader economic implications. And sort of think about the indirect suppliers of this sector. So many times in the Rio Grande Valley, if you go to a construction site, you'll notice there'll be people driving around in cars honking their horns, so they can get people to come and buy drinks or food stuff from their cars. So these individuals are also being hurt by these who are not themselves in sort of construction. And then think about the other sort of restaurants that might be catering to these individuals. There are potential broader economic damages to consider to the Rio Grande Valley. Construction has been a key star area and GDP in the region. Again, I mentioned it grew by 140 basis points, while there was no change in the state of Texas over that period of time. So, and then there's nothing to say about the human toll on this. So there's sort of the, what effects these shocks have to the households, what effects these effects have to household income, and the ability for a household to invest in your own sort of the child's human capital development. They may have intergenerational impacts for decades to come. So in summary, the RGV has a very young population. College age population is growing, which is a strength for the region. The area GDP is strong, yet underperforms relative to the state. Construction has been a bright spot, but there are some concerns, especially given the current political climate. Cameron County is powering through, again, showing real growth in labor productivity. And that's what I have. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm the one to bring us home here, both on this panel and for this event. I don't actually have a deck, but I do prefer to stand at the podium. My name is David Cisneros. I'm a developer based out of Houston, Texas. The development JV that we have is called Romulus, and as kind of a core investment thesis, it focuses on product types and particular investments that empower neighborhoods and communities at that specific person-facing level. So within that, we work on retail, looking at neighborhood centers, neighborhood serving restaurants, small shopping centers, prioritizing like local operating partners and tenants. And then we do a lot of work on the housing side as well. So a lot of that discussion that's been had today about the empowerment of people to own homes in this country, particularly our immigrant communities, is something we're very focused on. And we have some interesting form factors. We're building standalone single family housing in downtown Houston that's only 400 square feet, but is like really high quality standalone homes. And the result of that is they provide something of like a backdoor to home ownership for people that are largely fully closed out, even in the Texas demographics and the Texas housing markets. And how does that all play to the conversations we're having today? I think one thing I wanted to focus on, at least initially, was putting on my developer hat, sort of zooming out and talking about what makes a place attractive for development, right, or investment. And I think whether one is focused on these sort of community and neighborhood-based projects that we work on, or if you're doing industrial real estate, these data centers, tilt wall, logistics, space. If you're looking at doing housing, at like a different scale, right? Like master plan communities, large multifamily, the enduring and sort of most dependable indicator that this is a smart project to undertake and the right community to invest in is population growth, right? It's like the opposite of like the canary in the coal mine, right? It's like the single best indicator that there will be like future population to support new housing, new schools, whatever, right? And so when we reflect on that, that is largely the story of the Texas Triangle, right? Like this economic miracle that we're lifting up and love to talk about is one of population growth. So of the top 8 fastest growing US cities in the last 10 years, 5 of those have been in Texas, right? So Houston, Dallas, Austin, Fort Worth, and San Antonio. And this population dynamic is like very elemental to the Texas identity at this point, right? Like it's not mythology, but it's
something we treat with a lot of reverence. And it sort of is very core to the psyche of like Texans. And so to unpack that and tie that to the immigration story, I wanted to talk a little bit about Houston as a case study for tremendous population growth in this last 50-year cycle. And of those 5 cities that I lifted up as sort of these like outliers, these superlative growth cities, Houston is the largest, most diverse, and youngest. So I have some stats that I want to sort of anchor us on as we sort of advance the conversation. But using 1980 as a census baseline, so 45 years ago, going in order of largest to smallest, Houston was 63% Anglo, 20% African American, 16% Latino, and 2% Asian. So today, again, going from largest to smallest, Houston is 43% Latino, a plurality, 28% Anglo, 19% African American, and 10% Asian. And that trend of increased, Latinification is quite magnified the younger that you look at slices of that population. So for Houstonians under the age of 20, 51% are Latino, right? It is the majority, it is most young people in the Houston metro area are Latino. So it's worth examining what exactly happened, in that 45-year period, right? Like that demographic change is like enough to make your ears pop. Like it's an incredible evolution. And when you peel back the layers of what's happened there, 100% of that net population growth came from non-white populations. It's kind of an incredible framing. Looking at Harris County, which is the county that surrounds Houston largely, in 1980, there were about 2.4 million people. Of that population, 1.4 was Anglo, so about 60%, the same number we were just talking about. Today, there are still almost exactly 1.4 million Anglos that live in Harris County. And yet, the population of Harris County has increased from 2.4 to 4.7 million. So if you are part of that 1.4 million Anglo population, in that timeline, you've gotten 2.5 million additional new neighbors, and every single one of them was Hispanic, was African American, or was Asian, which is like an incredible thing to sort of digest, right? So the entirety of that population growth, this economic success story that we love to tell, right? Like this is sort of elemental to our identity, has largely been fueled by like this influx of non-white immigrants, largely Latinos, right? So this international migration and like this sort of powerful new economy of like Latinos in the United States is really like the secret sauce of this like Texas economic era, and has been for like 50 years, right? So I do think when we talk a lot about like, America's Latino future, when you dial it in on Texas and you dial it in specifically on like the big metropolises like Houston and Dallas and others, it's really the current Latino present, right? So, to drive that home like slightly further, you're looking at demographic trends. If Houston itself had not had this like incredible boost of immigration and primarily Latino inbound immigration, its population demographics would largely resemble that of like Detroit, right? Or like Buffalo, like on a similar timeline, that their metro areas have completely stagnated from a population growth percentage, like on that exact same timeline, where there may have been 2.4 million people that lived in Cleveland in 1980, and now there's like 2.2, right, as a metro area. So I think what is sort of like key to dial in here and bringing it back to like the sort of the subject matter of today is that like, what creates these like population growth haves and have-nots, right? And it's the same answer to the question of like, why do immigrants come to places like Houston, Dallas, and others? And it comes back to the economic pragmatism that was mentioned earlier, that, it's job growth, it's like affordability, it's the availability of housing, it's like upward social mobility, it's the prevalence of entrepreneurial opportunities, right? And so many of those things can be controlled by policymaking. It is not like a happenstance accident, like it actually can be created and cultivated, and it's able to be embedded in like the policies of a particular place. And I think to further double down on that, like the needs of Latinos they really resemble the needs of like all like ambitious, like hardworking people, right? So addressing what they need is like kind of elemental to like survival and like the sense of like seeking economic opportunity, which like resonates broadly with I think so many people in America right now. So I think like kind of the key point here is that, effectively like, international migration has been essential to the city of Houston. It's probably the largest driver of economic growth in the last 50 years. And it's a great case study because I think, the most alarming slide that Luis presented, and he showed a lot of slides that showed this general like hockey stick down in the last year or two. The most alarming one, when you sort of frame it in this conversation, is the reduced inbound migration in the last year, and the projection that it will even drop further next year, right? What is the secret sauce that sort of drives these city economies? And so I think like sort of at its core, like if we think about like why do developers invest in places, why do companies relocate from other markets? How do people win in this sort of like nationally competitive economy? I think it's quite tied to the need to sort of like collectively recognize and celebrate, Latino contributions and immigration. And, I think it's just an interesting balance of where we're at, politically in this country right now, where I think like the support of Latinos and the migration and the growth and so much of what's been talked about by others today, it's not really a political issue in the sense that I think at its core, it is like an incredible economic opportunity. So I think we'll open it. Questions here? Thank you.
All right, we've got about 5 minutes for questions. We've got a mic here in the back. I'll start us off with a question for Dr. Torres. I thought I read right that employment in energy in Texas down 3%, 3+%. What's driving that?
Oil prices, and also our energy sector has become very productive. I didn't have other statistics regarding the energy sector in Texas, but the rig count, so you look at that, it's fallen, right? We're producing more with less. So I think that technology advancement, all these things are leading to that. But again, the weakness in the oil market, the oil prices, and if you add that to productivity.
Oh, got a question up here, please. Probably talk about it. Jennifer mentioned earlier
shifting immigration enforcement to employers away from deportation to more, I gather, E-Verify systems and the like. And it strikes me that we all know we need these fresh young talents, workers, et cetera. The country right now broadly has mandated a tougher immigration stance. How do we get there from a policy perspective? Is there any silver lining to getting to a more sensible immigration where we increase the legal immigration and make it easier for people to come and contribute?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the horror of American politics today is you had an open border policy, which was a disaster, and then led to the current regime. The current regime is not the most rational in history, but I think there are very clear ways. I think if the better people in both parties could sit down and say, we need these people. What we don't need, obviously, we don't need criminal aliens, and trying to defend that is kind of absurd. But I think what you need to do is you need to go to each individual case and you say, okay, you're here, you register. If you're working, you're not collecting welfare, you haven't done anything wrong, you can get permanent residency and then get at the back of the line for immigration. I just feel that the people who went through it the right way, my wife's an immigrant, and she went through the painful process of getting American citizenship. I think actually the vast majority of Americans are actually, and I think Lynette could probably back me up on this, a vast majority of Americans are neither open borders or restrictionists. And they know damn well that this immigrant population is critical on all sorts of levels, from construction workers to technical geeks to entrepreneurs. So I think that there's a reasonable policy. The problem is that we have idiots running both parties, and so it's very difficult to come up with a good solution. But I think there is a logical, very logical way of dealing with it. The only problem is that we can't get the political parties to do it.
Hi, my name is Alicia Perez Hodge, and I'm with the League of United Latin American Citizens. Last September, I wrote an article and addressed this issue. And during that research, I saw Canada as a very successful program where they do bring migrant workers in. They assure that they're paid well, that they're housed, that they're fed, those sorts of things. And they work for a period of time and then go back. And they've been doing it for a lot of years. I think someone mentioned, Jennifer, you mentioned that sort of program. And by the way, so did Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is a Republican, has said the very same thing. I think that we should explore that because we need them and they're willing to work. And a lot of them don't want to stay here. Some of them do, but a lot of them, they will want to work, make their salaries, and then go back home and build their house in their countries. So I agree, we need to talk common sense and meet the needs of our country and also workers that want to adhere to work. So thank you.
Let me just add one thing, just to that, for the older people, remember the Bracero program? That's what we have from
Canada doesn't do that.
Yeah, no, but so just to add, there was a cool research done, Cedillo at Yale, and invited a couple of economists, and one of the economists they invited was my boss, Pierre Arrhenius, which is awesome, which with immigration issues and research. And if you want to look it up, they got together and they kind of did like a little research on that, like a Bracero water program 2.0 for the US. If you're interested in looking at that, at their findings and what they found about that. Yeah.
So what's her finding?
So I think I do not remember top of my head. So, but yeah, basically is that it could possibly be a feasible way to do that, right? That's what they found. And look it up. We'll look it up. Yeah.
We have time for just one more in the back. You want to, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. And you may have mentioned this already, but I'm curious if y'all have done on the immigration, either the Federal Reserve or any of your other analysis of how the immigrants, especially the poor immigrants, you have a breakdown of documented, undocumented.
Well, the only thing we do know is that the rate of poverty among the undocumented, particularly in California, is very high, much higher than the legal immigrants. And I've just looked at those numbers yesterday. So there's definitely a problem. One of the big problems is that the undocumented grew by such a large number with essentially no restrictions that many of them are now coming in and they really have no way of supporting themselves. And so we have that problem. But you know, the failure of the country, particularly of California, to create an economy that could accommodate some of that growth is why we have extraordinarily high levels. California, cost adjusted, has the highest poverty rate in the United States, which is insane in a state with 160 billionaires.
And what's the sort of proportions?
I'd have to look at, I don't remember everything but the numbers are quite high, and they're certainly either in this report or the one we did in California.
All right.
Well, how about a round of applause for our final panel? Thank you very much. We've got lunch in the back, so please let's continue the conversation over lunch. Thank everyone for coming, and what a wonderful event.